So as you said, I'm happy to represent both universities today, Minnesota and North Dakota. I got my maroon name tag on, and I'll be talking about Cercospora, leaf spot, and some of the results that I saw in field trials this year and what we can kind of do to manage the disease going forward. Easier said than done, but it's a big challenge. You know, I know growers this year who did everything right. You know, we're on time, but just the environment was unforgiving, and we've got to be, I guess, prepared for that going forward too. It's not easy. So I want to say, you know, we've seen the last couple of years very high disease pressure, relatively high actually throughout the valley, all the way up north. And it's it's the same pathogen, right? But there are some new things. We've seen that environment really be less forgiving these last couple of years, as well as the continuing adaptation of the pathogen to overcome the CR+ trait. So it's kind of a new ball game compared to a few years ago, even right before I started, right when I was starting here in 2023. So my goal through this presentation, my program, you know, throughout the years to come up with data and produce the data that will help you, the growers, produce a good crop and make the CLS management decisions the best that you can. Protect the investments, not just of you in the crop year and then the factories as well. It's a system, and this is just a piece of it. So I do want to share just briefly, you know, the two end-on sites that I use for this region, Wilmer and Murdoch, were both approximately 150% of the total rainfall in June, July, August, and September compared to the 5-year average. So we know that. There was, of course, a lot of variability, but that was one of the defining factors for the Cercospora season this particular year. Again, Cercospora leaf spot, we see these lesions on the leaf. They expand over time, and the leaves will die, and we see the whole field turn brown. And the new leaves grow up, but those new leaves are sugar consumers. They're not sugar producers right away. So that's even though the maybe visual ratings driving by the highway maybe not look so bad, but we've had that canopy burned down once, and it takes a lot of sugar to produce a new canopy that may not even return on that plant's investment right by the end of the season. So I want to talk about spore production. The pseudostromata are these tiny little black structures that form in the center of the lesion, and from each of these little dark structures, the spores are produced. So Cercospora leaf spot produces many spores per lesion, hundreds of spores per plant, and each spore has the potential to produce a new lesion. And even if we get one new lesion per leaf, over time that rate will increase as the season goes by. This pathogen just is able to wait for the right conditions, and before we know it, we have an exponential increase in that disease outbreak, and we're looking at a Cercospora leaf spot epidemic. So it's an exponential growth curve, and I'll spare you guys a math lesson. I'm no math expert either, but for the sake of time as well, right? So it's before we need to do what we can to keep the disease in check before we have an ever increasing rate for the Cercospora leaf spot infection. And when we hit that epidemic form, we see the row opening, right? We talk about row closure for leaves, but then we see the bare ground in between the rows as those older leaves die off, and then the new leaves grow up and maybe cover that up, hide that from us, right? But the damage is done at that point, and there's really no recovery at this point. You know, it's the best we can do to you know, give those new leaves a chance, right, to recover, but much of the loss has already occurred. So we want to lengthen out that flat portion of the exponential growth curve. We want to do what we can to keep the disease levels low as long as possible. And there's really one management step we can do in the season, and that's fungicide application. These are protective and preventative. They are not curative. Fungicides really have a hard time playing catch up, right? We're talking about what's going on in the leaf surface. Sure, there's that translaminar activity, but once Cercospora has a hold, it's tough to, you know, we can't manage it at that point as well as we can in the beginning of the season. And we have field trial data, and I'll go into that next to support this. We have evidence that shows, yep, this is what we know from a scientific perspective is indeed happening in the fields. I will say the thing about going into 2026 following this past year is we're already behind the 8 ball. The inoculum load in the region is going to be really high, and it's kind of a watch out for this region. we are primed here for another epidemic and increases the need to stay on top of that proactive management. Already we're at that, starting off at a higher disease level, ready to get to that level as soon as we begin the season. So I conducted some field trials here across the valley, both at Renville and then farther north as well. And my trials had two goals. One, how early is too early to spray for Cercospora leaf spot? One of the things I've been known to say is spray early and spray often. That's true, yes, but it's not quite that simple. So I conducted trials looking at spray timing and also how to adjust the trials for different environments. I think it's safe to say we do expect, again, a fair amount of moisture, a fair amount of heat in the southern Minnesota region compared to farther north, where I conducted other trials. But we want to make sure that we're looking at those lower pressure environments as well. So I'll conducted that trial as well. But today I'll just focus on the two southern locations, Renville, which I conducted in cooperation with David Metler, and the Foxholm location as well in the Mindak region. So this experiment had 8 trials total. I'll focus on the 4. At each trial site, I used 2 varieties. I was not comparing the varieties directly. One is a CR+, one was a non-CR+ variety, with the rating going into the 2025 season of about a 2 and a 5. So each trial consisted of 6 trial treatments, and varying only in fungicide application spray timing and interval. That is the week that the fungicide program started in each treatment and the interval between the subsequent sprays. And they range from 0 to 7 applications per treatment. The Southern Min trials did get that extra application just to fit with what the standard program was going on here at that time. So here are the programs. This is the standard Cercospora leaf spot management program for Southern Min, and that was the program used in both of these trials. I believe the Mindak program was very similar and will likely continue to be so, starting with a DMI, then going to the tin topsin, and then the QOI. So both the topsin and the QOI, pyraclostrobin, were included in these trials. Following up with the tin and EBDC, and then every product was indeed tank mixed with Coverall was the product that I had used. But again, not comparing products necessarily. That wasn't the point of this trial. Here in the Renville location, in order to hit that 7th spray, we did add another tin and Macazeb application prior to the final copper and Macazeb application in September. Now the treatment timing, here's what really changed between the treatments. I started one treatment in mid-June, actually due to some late starts here in the Renville region. That was June 21st for the Renville trial, June 17th for the Foxholm trial. The late June was June 28th at Foxholm, and just after July 1st in Renville. And then early July, which by the crop growth stage, that was at row closure, so past the recommended start time per the Southern Min CLS management recommendations, and then of course a non-treated control. So that's 3 spray program, had extended intervals. You know, we didn't expect much of it out of this in this high pressure region. And the 4 spray programs, you know, maybe not quite so much, but of course for the sake of comparison, that's what we're looking at here. But most of the activity that we saw was from those mid-June and late June programs. I'll use the term standard interval. That is a 10 to 14 day interval, approximately 2 weeks between every single spray, and the extended interval that I evaluated, where the first 2 sprays were A and B, they were on time, right? And then the next sprays were spaced out to that 21-day mark, approximately. Now again, summarizing the environment, which was the biggest difference between the sites, but also Foxholm and the Wilmer site were fairly even. Of course, we had more rain at Wilmer, Renville area, Southern Min region. But you know, in terms of total Cercospora DIV values, that is the risk based on humidity and temperature, was approximately similar. So I'm confident that the environments were relatively close, at least separate from our low disease pressure. So here we can see our high disease pressure areas, Foxholm and Renville, as well as the low disease pressure. I wanted to share this slide not just for context for the high and low disease pressure, but also we see very little difference between the two varieties. Actually, we see, where I have this blue color is the non-Sierra Plus sugar beet, and that orange-red color is a Sierra Plus variety, and very, very similar results among the two. So that was very interesting, and I think reflects what we saw, what growers and we saw in the rest of the region as travel around as well. This slide is the disease severity, AUDPS. I'll use that quite a bit. That's just simply a value calculated that allows us to compare how both the disease incidence and severity changed over time in each of these treatments, where higher values indicate more severe disease. For leaf ratings, now when I averaged all of the treatments, good treatments, poor performing treatments together, we can see the average is just about a 4 in the low disease sites, and then in the high disease sites between 5 and 6 in Renville and Foxhome. So pretty significant disease pressure. And of course, those non-treated plots were indeed burned down, but these 5s are averaged among them all. So here are the results at the Renville site. This purple color is the non-treated 0 sprays, and there is what stands out immediately when we look at AUDPS, that is disease severity on the y-axis, lower disease. We can see that the most successful treatments were indeed the treatments that began early in the year prior to row closure, not waiting until row closure is occurring, right, but making sure there's still soil visible between the rows when that first fungicide application goes on. The mid-June treatment and the late June treatment were actually different in terms of disease control, where we saw that late June treatment perform better than the mid-June. So in this particular trial, because of the wet year, stunted some of the beets early on. This was comparing June 21st versus July 1st. A little bit unexpected. It's hard to say exactly what caused that, but I'll show you again. We saw the same trend at Foxhome as well. So I think dialing in on the beet physiology and sticking with prior to row closure, but not to look, I guess, extremely ahead in June, right? We've got the recommendations from the co-ops, from the university folks, and my colleague Ashok as well, just prior to row closure. So that in this trial at least did appear to be just as effective, if not more effective than those early treatments. And of course, the 4 sprays, 3 sprays, we saw decreasing benefit. We saw that is increasing disease levels as we reduce the number of sprays. Now here at Foxhome, again, same thing. I've got the red boxes around the early to mid-June treatments, which at Foxhome was June 17th, and then the late June treatment, which was June 28th approximately here in this trial. So those 2 treatments were the same statistically, but there was a numerical increase over that late June start versus the mid-June start. Part of it has to do, I think, with how that DMI application lines up with high pressure right as the rows close. So it shows that those DMI treatments, which is a translaminar product in my case, used Proline, prothioconazole, having that on early at the right time, prior to the peak pressure as CLS pressure ramps up in July is going to be a benefit, right? As opposed to applying that the contact fungicides, tidamakazeb, at the end of June. Recoverable sugar, again, so I didn't want to include the St. Thomas results just to tell you all that should our environment be very dry, very cool, and not conducive to disease, we're still going to see a benefit to those early applications, and that is where most of the benefit to a spray program is going to come from. So St. Thomas, low disease site, my highest plots actually rated about a 4 at the end of the year, even in the non-treated plots, very mild due to the environment. Farther up north, St. Thomas, it's about 2 hours north of Fargo. But again, the most efficacious treatments in this trial were those fungicide programs that began prior to row closure. So no matter what kind of year we have next year, it's important to stick with the program and keep being proactive in terms of disease management. Here's recoverable sugar. So recoverable sugar, both in the CR Plus and the non-CR Plus variety, reflected which fungicide treatments were most effective. We saw, again, approximately equivalent values between the mid-June and late June treatments. Again, I've got those outlined in red, but those were, without a doubt, more improved compared to the late starts and reduced total applications. Just illustrating, again, the importance of that protective, preventative, and proactive fungicide management plan. Recoverable sugar at Foxhome, again, very same story. So in those high disease environments, we see an absolute return on investment for those fungicide applications, no matter what point we're at in the season or in the valley here. So the best program at Renville was indeed about a 900 pounds per acre increase in sugar. So that was, of course, great to see. That is 900 pounds increase over the 3-spray program, or I should say over the 4-spray program. So going from a 4 to a 5 or a 5 to a 6 is going to be a return on investment. You know, and especially in this region when we're thinking about a 6 versus 7 spray program. Thank you, Mark. 7 spray versus 8 spray program, you know, I do expect to see a return on investment at least to cover that cost of fungicide application for you know, continuing that control and making sure CLS control is maintained. People ask me, they say, Eric, what's the product, or is there any magic bullet out there for Cercospora or even any number of other things that we may apply to increase our return per acre on sugar beets? And the only thing that I can say that has consistently shown results at improving returns, whether it's 5 to 6% on a per acre total revenue value, is going to be another fungicide spray. So sticking with the fungicide program and keeping up with those application timings is going to by far outweigh any other magic bean, magic potion, right, that we may look at. And some of those, you know, may work in certain circumstances. I won't get into that today, just for the sake of time and topic. But the fungicide applications are indeed going to be a good investment, no matter what. So 2 years in a row, we saw these very similar results. I will highlight again just the 2024 season in Foxhome, where we saw those early applications, the mid-June and the late June applications, by far and away outweigh the results from waiting until early July or even late June to start that application. We did indeed see that benefit last year as well. 2 years in a row of fairly high disease pressure. I'm very pleased with how the data is shaping up. Just to emphasize and support what we're already doing, what we're already recommending for Cercospora disease management. Got my fungicide resistance. So the one thing that we'll get into a little bit later, I think, with the other speakers, and is managing fungicide resistance, and what's the connection between our good spray programs and fungicide resistance. So the two big risk factors for fungicide resistance really relate to our programs that we're using, right? Rotation and tank mixing, but then also the size of the Cercospora population. One of the best ways to minimize the risk of fungicide resistance developing to any active ingredient is keeping a small pathogen population. So these early sprays, these before row closure sprays, this fungicide timing is going to help manage this other problem that we think about when it comes to Cercospora control. Proactive fungicide applications and tank mixing are indeed going to limit the size of that population, reduce the number of spores on the leaves and the air floating around, reduce the inoculum for next year, and reduce that selection pressure through tank mixing. So these good stewardship practices do work and will work. I have this slide from my colleague, Dr. Secor and Vivian Rivera, showing kind of the change in fungicide sensitivity over the years, 2021 through 2025. Both the DMI, difenoconazole, prothioconazole, actually these are all DMIs, tetraconazole and mefen. So whatever DMI we use, we see over time approximately actually very similar levels of resistance. The y-axis is a scale resistance factor that is just a measure of how that organism is adapting to similar levels of that active ingredient. But again, the main point here is just that we see very similar levels for all of the ingredients between the years, right? We see some different bars here, but not comparing them to each other, but just across the years, the resistance levels are approximately similar. So to me, I think that's a good indication that resistance management strategies are working. And I can say great work, and we want to keep that up in order to have these products continue to be effective into the future with tank mixing and mode of action rotation. In closing, I just want to re-emphasize, I've said it before, that key message, the #1 programs just prior to at row closure. More flexibility when the disease risk is low. We don't know what kind of season we're going to get. We can maybe guess. But even if we have if it looks like it'll be a low pressure disease year, and even if it turns out to be a little bit drier, right, which will be good in a lot of ways, that proactive approach is still going to be important and still going to provide a return on that investment. Proactive, even in those low disease environments like we saw farther north as well. Same story. I want to conclude then by thanking my sponsor, R&E Board, as well as all those who help make these trials possible, and the cooperators here in Southern Maine as well. And I'll be at the panel. Feel free to reach out anytime I'm here today or elsewhere. With that, thanks for the opportunity to present here today.